بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين ولا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت بيده الخير وهو على كل شيء قدير أستغفرك ربي وأتوب إليك إنك أنت التواب الرحيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم ونصلي ونسلم ونبارك على محمد النبي الخاتم الأمين وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. We begin, as in all affairs of our life, in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most compassionate, the most merciful. And as in every affair of life, we beg for Allah's guidance, aid, and strength and support. Without Allah's guidance, aid, and strength and support, we have no anchor and we have no backbone. It is always my dream, and the dream, I think, of every mu'min that is anchored in Islam. It has always been my dream that we Muslims live up to the charge that Allah has given us, to the covenant that Allah has given us by virtue of the fact that we are Muslims. And that in doing so, we become bearers of Allah's words and Allah's message unto humanity. That when Allah tells us in the Quran in no equivocal terms, وَأَحْسِنُوا فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ, be good doers. But it's not just good doers. وَأَحْسِنُوا, be in a constant state of beautification, in a constant state of doing what is beautiful. For that is what Allah loves. Allah loves those who do beautiful deeds. That when Allah gives us this charge, that we take it to heart and take it seriously. So seriously that we become as if a lighthouse of morality and ethics unto humanity. We become as if the moral pilots of humanity. When the Prophet ﷺ says, وَإِيَّاكُمْ وَالظُّلْمِ فَإِنَّ الظُّلْمَ ظُلُمَاتٌ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ, don't you dare commit injustice and acts of darkness, because acts of darkness and injustice will become your darkness in the hereafter. That this becomes as if a constitution as if a moral anchor in our lives. That when Aisha radiallahu anha, the Prophet's wife, says that I heard the Prophet ﷺ say, among those that Allah has cursed, لعنهم الله ولعنهم كل نبي المتسلط على أمتي بالجبروت ليذل من أعز الله. That among those that is cursed by Allah and cursed by every prophet that comes from Allah are those who are despots, those who are dictators, those that humiliate and degrade. When A'azz Allah, the way I understand it and the way I believe it is the correct understanding, are human beings that Allah endowed with dignity. Allah created us and endowed us with dignity. And when there are those who through despotism and ugliness take away this dignity, rob human beings of their dignity, they are cursed by Allah and by every prophet. How can this not be a call to ethics? How can this not be a call to justice? How can this not light a fire under Muslims so that what defines them is a conscientious, ethical existence? How can it be? We will not even approach the thesis of ethically piloting humanity, contributing to humanity as a moral, ethical, conscientious being and head, unless we learn first to be ferocious and to be fearless and brave in confronting ugliness and confronting what is unethical and confronting what is un-Islamic. There was an incident recently that troubled me deeply, but that speaks volumes about our state as Muslims and is a silent and agonizingly painful commentary about our condition as American Muslims and Western Muslims, or Muslims in Europe or the US. It happened miles away. However, it demanded an ethical stand by all Muslims, because certain events define what you stand for before Allah forever. This incident involved a 7-year-old boy called Ra'fat Damba. A 7-year-old boy called Ra'fat Damba. This boy is in Yemen. And military forces supported by Yemen, by the Emirat, and in some reports even Emirati soldiers, raped and sexually assaulted and raped this 7-year-old boy. I'm sorry, not the boy. The boy is not called Rafat Demba. Rafat Demba is a witness. I'm sorry, I mixed up. But the 7-year-old boy, which is better not to name him, was assaulted and raped. A brave Muslim called Rafat Demba witnessed the incident, witnessed the rape of the 7-year-old boy. And Rafat Demba insisted that he will testify in court against the rapists of the 7-year-old boy. So what happened? The Emirati forces came, took Rafat Demba before the eyes of his mother, right in front of his mother, and as she begged them not to do so, they killed him. They killed the witness who could testify against them. Rafat Demba is a hero. Rafat Demba stands for what Muslims should stand for. In Yemen, after this incident, there were demonstrations for days protesting the abuses committed by the Emirati forces in Yemen, and protesting the rape of the 7-year-old boy, and protesting the murder of the witness who was going to testify against the criminals, the animals who raped this kid. And of course, the demonstrations went on for days. They were treated brutally by the Emirat forces and their allies. And the incident, which was in the beginning of March, passed without a single mention by anyone. The issue is this. Emirat currently has documented, at least documented, those known, what is known, 27 sites in which human rights organizations documented the occurrence in Yemen, 27 sites of savage torture. And what is grotesque and unconscionable is that in these 27 sites, all of them report sexual assaults, rape, and sexual humiliation and degradation. Now you might say, well, but listen, this happens in Syria, this happens in Egypt, this happens in Saudi, this happens in everywhere in the Middle East. What I care about is the moral stand, the moral piloting of American Muslims. Because when an incident like this happens, and American Muslim leaders or so-called leaders trounce around accepting invitations to go visit the Emirat and praise the Emirat for its policies of tolerance, when in an incident like this happens and American Muslim so-called leaders go around celebrating the Pope's visit to the Emirat, when an incident like this happens and American Muslims or so-called American Muslim leaders or so-called leaders, because they're American Muslim, it's just that they're so-called leaders, accept positions on being on fatwa councils and the like in the Emirat, that is an indication of a deep moral rupture and a deep moral failure. When a 7-year-old boy is raped and a man stands to bear witness before Allah in truth and in justice, and that man is murdered, and not a single American Muslim reaches out to his poor mother, and not a single American Muslim stands in a single khutbah around the United States, or in a single even position, and says, this is disgusting and immoral and unacceptable. But even more, when American Muslim so-called leaders then accept honorific trips and visitations and whatever other diplomatic garbage with the Emirat, I see a deep moral failure. And a serious moral failure. And mark my words, Allah will not bless us. Allah will not aid us. Allah will not support the unjust. And this is what epitomizes injustice. As long as we continue to be cowards and spineless and equivocal in situations that cannot bear equivocation, Allah will not be with us. Allah will leave us to our hawa, to our whims, and our own destruction. May Allah protect us and guide our sight so we can discharge our covenantal obligation, our khilafah before Allah. And may Allah bless the soul of Denba, the brave hero who was willing to testify because he couldn't stand seeing a 7-year boy gang raped and lost his life as a result. واسأل الله يستجب لكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين. نستغفرك ربي ونستعين بك إنك خير معين. ونصلي ونسلم ونبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه. Hate, ugliness, immorality, injustice are all part of the same tapestry of darkness that comes in and blinds the eyesight, the moral insight of human beings. It has not been now long at all, and we all remember the other side of ugliness and what transpired in New Zealand when a man walks into a masjid and shoots and kills all those that he killed. May Allah accept them as martyrs and give patience and strength to their families. The man who did this posted a manifesto which he titled The Great Replacement. But it is important to understand and to remind ourselves that this manifesto, even the title of the manifesto, is extremely significant, and we should pause and study and reflect, because otherwise we as Muslims might find ourselves confronting another genocide like the Bosnian genocide, if not a complete Holocaust. That title, The Great Replacement, is extremely troubling because it's not invented by that murderer, the terrorist that committed the New Zealand attack. The Great Replacement was the title of a book by Renaud Camus, who published a book in 2012 in France called The Great Replacement. The book has been translated in English and unfortunately has many positive reviews on the net. And that 2012 book basically warns that Muslims, through natural immigration and geographic processes, through, in other words, marriage and birth and so on, are going to take over Europe, and the dark, ugly Muslim race will replace the beautiful, superior, supreme white race in Europe. And it calls for drastic and ugly measures to be taken in order to prevent what the author Camus sees as the frightening fate that awaits Europe. Now, of course, Renaud Camus didn't himself invent that idea. But John Ruspal, in 1973, in a book called The Camp of the Saints, Le Camp de Saints, came up with the same precise idea in a mythologized, thinly camouflaged narrative about how refugees, Muslim refugees, will take over Europe and destroy the Western civilization through peaceful means. And in a typically fascist and racist way, very much like the Turner Diaries in the US, called upon France to act preemptively. The 1973 book, Le Camp de Saints, itself is cited very heavily by the Swiss-Israeli ex-military writer who wrote the book Eurabia, and what's his name? Bet Yaor. Bet Yaor, in his book Eurabia, warns Europe that the white race, although he's a Jew, but still he identifies as part of the white race, and says that Europe must act preemptively to rid itself of the Arab and Muslim danger. The irony in this, so that even that manifesto, The Great Replacement, is not some tract by an insane outlier. He is tapping into a narrative that has deep roots and an ideology of genocidal ideology that is deeply anchored, unfortunately, in Europe and the United States. The work of Camus and the work of Bet Yaor And the work, the idea, the literature, the imagery, the language, the symbols of the great replacement in all these works played a key role in constructing the language and project of Islamophobia. And this is critical to understand and study. Recently, the Southern Poverty Project came out with a report called Intelligence Report Spring 2019. Every thinking Muslim should read this report. Every Muslim that cares about the fate of humanity must read this report. It is very long, and of course we don't have time to get into it, but I will share with you that the report documents a sharp rise in Islamophobic, what it calls anti-Muslim groups, a sharp rise since the election of Donald Trump, and a sharp rise in the funding of these groups, and documents the existence of these groups in every state in the United States. California has many of these anti-Muslim Islamophobic groups. But it also documents the very alarming phenomena, and that is the role that these anti-Muslim groups play in government recently, or currently. So, Ed Gaffney and Brigitte Gabriel, the two famous, well-known Islamophobes who started out the anti-Sharia movement. And by the way, Brigitte Gabriel has a new Islamophobic book, and she's going on tour around the United States to promote it. So even, blood keeps flowing and hate crimes keep increasing. And according to this report, hate crimes against Muslims in the past year alone have increased 450%. And yet, Ed Gaffney and Gabrielle are still going on like all the other Islamophobes. But most alarming, in my view, is that it reveals that the same organization that Gaffney and Gabrielle set up, that there are deep, intimate ties between this organization and Pompey, the ex-chief of the CIA and current head of the State Department, that it reveals the organization is called ACT, the Gaffney and Gabrielle organization, that Mike Pompey was now Secretary of State, has long, well-anchored ties with the ACT, that John Bolton has been very active with the ACT, and that when John Bolton joined the Trump administration, he brought in Fred Fleitz, who is now the senior vice president, who before joining the Trump administration was the senior vice president of another Islamophobic organization called the CSP. And Fritz became chief of staff of the National Security Council. And I'm just taking little snippets from the thing that this report, that Larry Kudlow, who works as an advisor to Trump, has long ties with various Islamophobic organizations, that Thomas Homan, who delivered a keynote speech at the ACT, the Daphne and Gabrielle organization, who currently joined the Trump administration in immigration policies and so on. And the report goes on and on and on about the ties of various members of the Trump administration with the organizations that spearheaded and spearhead the anti-Sharia movement in the United States and the racist Islamophobic agenda in the United States, and that they, in fact, not only that, but Brigitte Gabriel bragged publicly that she is at the White House every week and that she has an open door invitation to Trump and that Trump consults with her about policies and so on and so forth. Now, at the same time, this same administration that has been documented time and time again to be deeply in bed with Islamophobic organizations is the same administration that Muslim countries worked very hard to get elected. And not just Muslim countries, but the country that is the guardian of the two holy sites. Not only that, but the intimacy between the Emirat, the same country that protects rapists of a 7-year-old boy and kills the witness and rapes people in 27 prisons, and then calls itself the country of tolerance and has a ministry of tolerance and invites the Pope, and that the head of the Muslim world, Saudi, the country that is supposed to be the equivalent of the papacy for Catholics, is deeply in bed with the same administration that is intimately interconnected with all the Islamophobic organizations. If we continue on having Jum'ahs and talking about brothers how to do wudu and how to do ghusl, and if we continue having Jum'ahs and having epileptic fits about where women sit and whether they're covered or not covered, if we continue having Jum'ahs and worry about whether we use Urdu or Arabic or Persian, rather than talk about what matters, Allah will continue forsaking us and not even gazing upon us, because Allah does not gaze upon the immoral and ugly. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم أمنوا النداء اللهم اغفر لنا واعف عنا وارحمنا اللهم اهدنا سواء السبيل والصراط المستقيم اللهم اهدنا لأقرب من هذا رشدا وانصر الإسلام واهدي المسلمين يا رب العالمين. Allah, forgive our sins and strengthen our faith and accept us in your light and in your care and in your compassion. Allah, give us the strength to stand for truth and justice and to condemn evil and ugliness wherever it may be, and to be present soldiers against hate and against misogyny and against bigotry and prejudice and racism. Ya Allah. Welcome. As-salamu alaykum.